Hello, guys. I am back for another day of reading this book, You Can Create an Exceptional Life by Louise Hay and Cheryl Richardson. It is 9 o'clock, so I'm just going to start. So chapter 5 is called Don't Break a Habit, Dissolve It. We're lost. My husband Michael and I are on our way to the wizarding world of Harry Potter in Orlando, Florida, with our good friend Eileen. I'm speaking at a conference in the area over the weekend, which will allow me the chance to meet with Louise. And the three of us have decided to sneak off and spend the day entertaining our inner kids before the conference begins. The drive has taken much longer than we anticipated, and we're almost out of gas, literally and emotionally. We got a late start after waiting for the rental car paperwork to be finalized, and there are now only a few short hours left before the park closes. When Michael, Eileen, and I finally arrive, we drive through the gated entrance and attempt to follow the directions to the parking lot. The signs are confusing, and my husband and I briefly argue about which way to go. I point in one direction, hoping that I'm right, and no sooner does he make the turn than it becomes obvious I'm not. So, with eyes ever mindful of the empty fuel tank, we're led back onto the highway, heading away from the park without a turnaround or gas station in sight. At this point, Michael and I are pretty pissed at each other, but we're too polite to say anything in the company of our friend. The tension of unspoken anger hangs like a heavy drape between us as my ego firmly grabs hold of the situation. I know I pointed in the right direction, but the signs were confusing. If Michael had paid attention, we wouldn't be in this mess. He always waits for me to make decisions. Why didn't he just make the choice himself? On and on my mind goes, mentally chewing the situation to pieces. I'm convinced that I'm right. Meanwhile, I know Michael well enough to realize that he's busy kicking himself for not trusting his gut and taking the turn he knew he should have taken. Eileen, smart gal that she is stone silent in the back seat, patiently waiting for us to unravel this mess. As I sit there fuming, I think of Louise and the conversations we've had about choosing good thoughts. For a fraction of a second, a door cracks open in my mind and I see a glimmer of light. I consider a different approach. Rather than redecorate hell by arguing about who did what, a practice pointed out to Michael and me by a helpful therapist long ago, I take a chance. I reach over, place my hand on Michael's, and mentally send him love. I don't say a word, and he doesn't move his hand. I look straight ahead at the road and visualize love floating from a divine source down through my body, out of my hand to his, and then into his heart. I keep this practice going for several minutes when I feel Michael's energy soften. As I continue to send him love, I notice something interesting. I feel love too. Instead of fuming about the wrong turn, I'm suddenly more concerned about my husband. My heart softens as I imagine how he must be beating himself up. Why would I want to heap more pain on top of that? As I send love to Michael, I can feel his defenses relax, and before I know it, we come upon a gas station and a turnaround. 30 minutes later, we're laughing and joking as we enter the park, ready to meet muggles, magicians, and who knows, maybe even Harry Potter himself. When I next meet up with Louise, I share my Harry Potter story. I tell her I'm still surprised by how something so simple could have such a profound effect on our day. So many times, in the middle of some silly argument, and some not so silly, I'd entertain the thought of dropping my defenses and listening with love, but it felt so counterintuitive, like giving in. After all, my ego is masterful at rationalizing a position. Why admit defeat when I've done nothing wrong? Isn't sending love just ignoring the problem? And how are we going to challenge each other to grow if we're not willing to take a stand for what we know to be true? The ego has one agenda, Louise tells me now. It wants to be right, and it has a habit of trying to justify its position. It searches for an angle where the other person is clearly wrong. It's a simple idea to think that focusing on a positive outcome or putting love into the situation could work, but it does. In your case, instead of affirming the problem by continuing to complain or argue, you just smiled inwardly, sent your husband love, and discovered that it works. While I was aware of the resistance I had surrendered to my ego, I had to admit that Louise was right. It did work. Too often, we feel like we need to grind everything we can out of a problem. She continues, we want to find the solution now. I don't like dealing with problems that way anymore. The more you can turn away from the problem, the quicker the solution becomes. That's why I love the affirmation, all is well, everything is working out for my highest good. Out of this situation, only good will come. I am safe. It lifts you totally up and out of the problem into an area where there are solutions. In this place, you're not telling life how to create the solution, you're just affirming that it's working for everybody. Your situation with Michael while driving in the car is a wonderful example because you did so little. You could have argued with him for the rest of the day and you would have both been miserable. That's for sure. And the truth is, we actually invite positive changes into our relationships when we're soft and open enough to listen. In fact, later that evening, when Michael and I returned to the hotel after visiting the park, we were able to talk about the situation calmly and constructively. Over the years, we've both learned that when there is defensiveness, there's no communication. Nada. No way, not a chance. We've also learned that it's important to let something go once we've worked through it in a loving way. Bringing it up again or complaining about it after the fact is an invitation for trouble. When a problem has been solved, we need to remember that it's gone, Louise instructs. It has passed. We don't want it to dip into the past to be miserable in the present moment. And we don't want to become complainers. People who complain a lot are a pain in the ass for everyone around them. Not only that, but they are doing great damage to their world. Before we verbalize a complaint, we tend to go over it in our mind several times, dozens of times, several dozens of times, dozens and dozens of times, depending on what our habit is. At this point, I cringe inside as I think about the amount of energy I've expended over the years complaining about everything from how busy I am to what Michael does or doesn't do. Before understanding the power of my own thoughts, I had allowed this inner complainer, a chronically irritated gal, to have free rein over my mind and mouth. She constantly griped about the same things over and over again, as if whining about them would somehow make things better. Most people have created a habit of constantly complaining in their mind, Louise tells me. Each time we do this, it is an affirmation, a very negative affirmation. The more we complain, the more we find to complain about. Life always gives us what we concentrate on. The more we concentrate on what is wrong in our life, the more wrongs we will find. The more wrongs we find, the more miserable we will become. It's an endless cycle. We become a constant victim of life. And that's when we feel like we're stuck in a rut. I add, once again, that's when we need to get back in the driver's seat and take charge of our thinking. Yes, the only person who can stop this negative landslide is the person who is doing the complaining. But first, they have to recognize what they're doing. Second, they have to recognize when they're doing it. It is only when we recognize that we're saying a negative affirmation that we can make the change. As people drop this self-damaging habit, they will watch themselves move from being victims to being conscious creators of their lives. Whether the habit we want to dissolve is complaining or something else, it is the same process. Notice I said dissolve, not break. When we break something, the pieces are still around. When we dissolve something, the whole experience disappears. I like to think it goes back to the nothingness from whence it came. Habits come from nowhere, and they can go back to nowhere. We all have habits. Some of them really support us, and some are letting us down. We want to select the ones that will contribute to creating love and joy, prosperity, good health, and a happy, peaceful mind. So we need to remember who created the habits we live with now and who's in charge of changing them. Yes, if there is anything negative in our lives, we want to find out how we are contributing to holding it in place. What are we doing to attract and maintain the negative conditions in our world? We are all powerful creators who create continuously. My experience has taught me that it is vital to a happy life that we become consciously aware of the negative chatter in our minds. What are we thinking? Why are we thinking this thought? What is this thought creating for us in our world? Once you notice this habit, the next step is to stop beating yourself up for thinking these thoughts. Instead, become delighted to notice what you're doing. You could tell yourself, no wonder I'm having this negative reaction. It's because I'm thinking this negative thought. Now I want to become aware of every time I do it so I can dissolve the habit. And the next time you catch yourself doing it, say, oh, I caught myself again. That's great. It is part of the dissolving process. I'm getting there. We want to rejoice when we're in the process of dissolving a negative habit. The idea is to stay in the present and look toward the future with a positive outlook as much as possible. My driving debacle with Michael is an example of the kinds of everyday challenges we all face as we move through life. As we bring more attention to how we live our days, it is important to keep in mind that we will get thrown off track by old habits, beliefs, and circumstances, especially when we're under stress. Louise and I go on to discuss a few of the common habits that need to be dissolved, the kind of obstacles that get people into trouble. The first one has to do with money. Each week, I host a live internet radio show, Coach on Call, where I provide coaching for people all over the world. I frequently receive phone calls from those who believe that starting a business will bring them a quick financial fix, or that winning the lottery is what they need to feel secure and happy. They are mired in magical thinking, believing in a future fantasy that ultimately keeps them stuck. So many people think that all they need to be happy and to fix all their problems is money, Louise says, but we know that there are thousands of people who have a great deal of wealth and still have plenty of problems. Clearly, money does not fix everything. We all want to be happy and to enjoy peace of mind, but happiness and well-being are an inside job. You can have both and still have very little money. It is all about the thoughts you choose to think, the rich or poor conditions you create inside of you. The amount of money we allow ourselves to have has everything to do with our belief system and what we learned about money as a child. Many women, for instance, find it difficult to earn more money than their fathers. The beliefs, I can't out-succeed my dad, or the only men earn high salaries, hold them back, even though they may not be consciously aware of it. And yes, there is also a belief that insists, if I win the lottery, all my troubles will be over. That is nonsense. In less than a year or two, almost everyone who wins the lottery is worse off than before they won it. That's because they did not have a change of consciousness to go with their new wealth. They might not have had the skills to manage their newfound wealth, but they also didn't believe that they were deserving of the money they'd won. The more we choose to believe in an abundant universe, the more we find that our needs are met. The affirmation, life loves me and all my needs are met at all times, will start us on the process. I tell Louise that I remember struggling with my own financial fears in my early 30s. I was living alone, trying to grow my business as a professional speaker, and constantly worrying about paying the bills. I was so anxious most of the time that all I could do was focus on the problem: no money. Rather than assuage my fear with a fantasy of overnight success or a lottery windfall, I was convinced that if I just worried enough, my circumstances would somehow magically change. When we worry, we repeat our worries over and over again until we have thoroughly frightened ourselves, she replies. Too many of us scare ourselves with our thoughts, but miracles occur when we repeat positive affirmation as often as, or more often than, our worries. This is how our negative conditions begin to turn around, no matter what the problem. I did my best during that time of my life to stay focused on positive affirmations, yet I found it difficult to sustain the practice while feeling so anxious. That's when I learned something important. Affirmations and appropriate actions are the keys to success. When I finally faced the fact that I needed to get a job and I started looking for one, I was suddenly working in cooperation with life. That's when circumstances began to change. I used the affirmation, "The perfect job finds me," as a continual mantra, and I started networking like crazy. By putting myself in a determined and focused state of mind, I discovered that life brought me the resources, people, and opportunities I needed to turn my situation around. If we are willing to do the work of changing our consciousness by changing our thoughts and acting accordingly, then we are able to create a new life for ourselves that is far grander than anything the lottery could bring us, Louise says. Then, as we reach new levels of success, we'll be able to sustain it because we've now had a change of consciousness and our belief systems have been updated. But remember, while everyone thinks being wealthy will make them happy, that's not where happiness comes from. If you can't love yourself, if you can't forgive, if you can't be grateful, money won't help. You'll just have more servants to yell at. Louise and I talk about a few of the steps everyone can take to dissolve the habits related to poor financial health. First, focus on feeling deserving and worthy of abundance so you can invite and receive more prosperity into your life. You can use affirmations such as, "I gratefully accept all the good I have in my life now. Life loves me and provides for me. I trust life to take care of me. I am worthy of abundance. Life always provides for my needs. Abundance flows into my life in surprising ways every day. My income is constantly increasing. I prosper wherever I turn." Choose one or two of these and repeat them over and over throughout the day. Write them down several times in a journal or on a piece of paper. Make them into signs and hang them around your home or office. And be sure to repeat them to yourself while looking into a mirror every chance you get. Writing can be a wonderful way to access wisdom and insight, so take some time to explore the following question in a journal or notebook. What one habit do I need to dissolve to create the financial life I want? If you set aside some time to explore this question, you might discover that you're living in the future, more focused on the good things that might happen rather than on the reality of what needs to get handled right now. Or you may need to step out of denial and stop pretending that you can continue spending money when you're unable to take care of the expenses you already have. Finally, identify the one step you most need to take to improve your financial health. Then focus on this one action, preferably the one you've been avoiding, and do something about it within the next 24 hours. You might need to pay your bills, file your taxes, or stop using your credit cards. Or you may need to look for any job that will bring money into your household as soon as possible so you can prepare yourself for more satisfying work later on. Remember, when you affirm your intentions and take action, you align yourself with universal energy, inviting life to rise up and meet you. If you're not sure what step to take, ask a trusted friend or family member for advice, someone who knows you intimately and has your best interests at heart. Here's another common problem many of us need to work on: wishing and hoping that those around us will finally get it and change. What do you do when someone keeps struggling yet won't do anything to change the situation? I was once leading a workshop when I opened the floor for questions about where these women felt stuck in relation to their self-care. One woman in her mid-40s immediately grabbed the microphone and began to tell us about her drama-filled life. It seems that every time she turned around, another crisis materialized in her life. The latest had to do with work. She had been falsely accused of harassing a fellow employee and was now panicked about losing her job. As she launched into the details of the situation, I was able to empathize with her plight, and I could tell that she had far more of her energy wrapped up in the problem than the solution. So I stopped her and suggested that she try something different. Why not begin to turn things around by shifting your language, I advised. For example, you could start by affirming, "I enjoy a peaceful resolution to this problem. The uncomfortable situation at work is resolved quickly and everyone feels content with the outcome." Or try, I release all drama from my life and now get energy from peace." "I can't possibly do that," she piped up with a pronounced edge of irritation in her voice. "My coworker is an idiot, and she's not telling the truth." For several minutes we did the ego dance, with me trying to find an opening in her frightened mind to allow her to approach the situation in a new way, and her struggling to convince me why it won't work. I knew the drill. This woman was using This woman was used to getting energy from drama, and in the past I would have spent far too much time trying to get her to change her mind. But because I recognized the dance, I knew I needed to allow her to continue to make herself right until she was ready to shift her perspective. I bowed out graciously and moved on to another question. Louise explains, that's what happens when people aren't ready to change. You can only make suggestions for how someone might support their own growth, but ultimately they need to be willing to do the work. We need to stop wanting people to do what they can't do, or be who they can't be. I've always said that I am not a salesperson. I'm not here to sell a way of life. I'm a teacher. If you want to come and learn from me, I'm happy to teach you, but I'm not going to force you to change your mind. That's your privilege. You have the freedom to believe anything you want to, and if you want to take this step in this direction and explore it, then fine. But if you don't, do your thing. We are all under the law of our own consciousness. Therefore, any problem is created at the level of consciousness of the person involved. Your consciousness can't change the situation, their consciousness needs to change. The woman at your workshop will continue to draw drama into her life until she recognizes that she is influencing these situations. It's not them out there. We are creating this in our world. It's her thoughts and beliefs that are contributing to the problem. It's such a shame because when people dismiss affirmations or decide that doing the kinds of things we're talking about are silly or unlikely to work, they just experience the same problems over and over again. Then they say that affirmations don't work. They do work. They just need to be used consistently. Our thoughts directly influence our life experience. In this way, we're contributing to everything that occurs in our lives. If we find ourselves in the middle of trouble, we need to reach for new habits that use our thoughts and energy in a more productive way. Affirmations help point us in a new direction so we can focus on a better outcome. And the key is to catch ourselves as quickly as possible rather than get pulled into the drama of the moment, Louise remarks. Remember, we need to stop and say, oh, look what I'm doing to myself. It's not about the other person, it's about me, what I can do right now to shift this energy. While the other person may be doing something to us or to the situation, we control how we respond and react. We need to always keep in mind that the goal in life is to feel good as much as we can. When dealing with this woman at the workshop, I was ultimately able to let her go on her way. But I asked Louise, what if someone is intimately involved with another person who's not ready to change? They might be dealing with an aging parent who is always negative, for example, or a spouse who isn't on the same path of self-discovery. How would they make peace with that situation? Many years ago, when I worked with people who had AIDS, I found that so many of them had been abandoned by their parents, totally abandoned. From the moment a parent found out that their child was a homosexual, they were banished from the family. A lot of it had to do with what the neighbors would think. When this happened, I would tell the man I worked with to use a version of an affirmation I mentioned earlier. I have a wonderful, harmonious relationship with everyone in my family, especially my mother. This was usually the person they struggled with the most. I suggested that they repeat this affirmation several times throughout the day. Every time the person came into their minds, they needed to keep repeating the affirmation. Now, in the face of being abandoned by their family, this certainly wasn't what anyone expected to be asked to do. But invariably, between 3 to 6 months after using this affirmation continually, a mother would agree to come to a meeting with her son. No kidding? I asked, both surprised and moved. Yes, Louise stops for a moment to revisit this memory, and I watch as tears well up in her eyes. And when she did show up, we would give her a standing ovation. It meant a lot to us. It was so healing. Dads were a little harder to get in, but moms would be there. and she'd find these homosexuals would give her so much love. So you could say that it's crazy to think an affirmation could do something in such a difficult situation. What could it possibly do? How could it influence someone else's behavior? I don't know. It went out into the others, and instead of the person having terrible thoughts about their family, they started to create space where there could be a harmonious relationship. I don't know how this stuff works. That's the mystery of life. I suggest that affirming a harmonious relationship with others can be applied in a variety of ways, and Louise agrees. Whether you train yourself to keep affirming that you have a harmonious relationship with your boss, your neighbor, a coworker, or an estranged family member, it's got to play out, she says. Bypass the issue and talk about what you want as though it is so. No more focusing on, my mother was mean to me. You don't want to get into that because that's what you are then giving power to. You want to stay focused on the goal instead. And we're not even saying that she has to behave in a certain way. We're saying that you get along wonderfully with everyone in your family, including your mother, and then you let life figure out how to put that together. You need to keep affirming that every time you think of the person or the problem. The more difficult the relationship, the more you need to repeat the affirmation. When these types of things happen, when we struggle with a difficult family member or feel blindsided by unexpected news like the diagnosis of an illness or the loss of a job, what's the fastest way to get back on track? First of all, you're allowed to have your initial reaction. You need to allow yourself to feel whatever you feel. When I talk about using affirmations, I'm not suggesting that you use them to avoid feeling your feelings. This is such an important point, I note. Too often I see people attempting to use affirmations as a way of glossing over or avoiding the truth, as if they're trying to override their emotions with their head. Whenever anyone uses their head as a ruler over their heart, they put themselves at a disadvantage. Feelings actually provide valuable information. If you're feeling overwhelmed by your job, it certainly would be helpful to affirm, I feel peaceful and calm at work. But it may also be an indication that you need to stop taking on extra projects as well. Or if you're feeling lonely in your marriage, you can hold the thought of a harmonious relationship, but you might also need to sit down with your spouse and talk about what's going on. When paid attention to, feelings let you know what is or isn't working in your life. Then they can point you in the direction of change. Ultimately, it's the alignment of head and heart that creates the alchemy that gives your affirmations power. Once you know what's going on and you've given yourself the chance to feel, you need to figure out how to get yourself out of the uncomfortable mental space as soon as possible, Louise says. This is the time to remember that the quality of this moment is the most important point of creation, right now. Every thought you think and every choice you make in this moment is setting your future in motion. So you want to put yourself in the right place. You need to truly understand the importance of that. So rather than be pessimistic, we need to become hopeful as soon as possible? No. The way I see it, hope is another obstacle. Saying I hope really means I don't believe. It's like putting your desire in some far distant future and believing that perhaps one day it might happen. That is not positive affirmation. You need to create a positive, present focused affirmation, and then you need to let go. Let go? You let go. You stop hanging on. Don't suffer. When there's nothing more you can do about a situation, just let it go because you're only holding on to the past and to the memories that are taking up too much room in your mind. So I would say, yes, definitely choose affirmations and do them nonstop. Try to find one or two that really comfort you and keep doing them and doing them. And if you can do mirror work, it helps a lot because you can really connect with yourself in that way. Look into a mirror whenever you can and say to yourself, we are getting through this. I love you and I am here for you. Just then, I glanced at the clock and realized that I need to leave for a meeting. Breaking the spell of the moment, I stand up and suggest that we meet later in the day. After Louise's book signing, a 2-hour period where hundreds of fans from around the world will line up for photos and autographs. As I put my notes into my bag, I turn to Louise with one last question. What about the things we can't control? The little negative events that push our buttons and keep us preoccupied throughout the day. A mean-spirited email or a comment from a jealous coworker. How do you handle those types of interruptions? That's easy, she replies with a sly smile. I'm no longer curious about the things that will upset me. Louise stares at me for several moments, her gaze locking in the message. I break eye contact, glance down at my phone, and tap the stop button on the recorder. Imagine not getting pulled into the drama of someone else's agenda. Now that's a habit worth dissolving. So that is the end of chapter 5. Um, there's 2 more chapters. So I will be back tomorrow, which is Wednesday. Yeah. Okay, see you guys later.